everyone. That is Laura, and this is Kyle, and this is He Said, She Said. Laura, happy post-Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You too.
Did you have lots of turkey?
Believe it or not, I didn't have any turkey. We did Thanksgiving breakfast.
That's un-American on every level.
I mean, we had a turkey breast with our bagels, lox, and cream cheese.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay.
So tonight we're going to talk about a very divisive topic, all right?
Ooh.
And it has to deal with divorce and money. Now, initially people react and everybody will have their own opinions, but I'm talking about finances in a post-divorce world. Everybody has got horror stories about, you know, how they lost this or you know, he tried to hide money or she took more money through the divorce. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the divorce is done. You're now living in a post-divorce world, and either you're living by yourself as a single parent, or you know, maybe you don't have children, but you've got money, and maybe you meet someone, and maybe they're divorced, and they've got their own situation, and they're maybe paying child support or receiving child support, and so you're trying to manage money in a post-divorce world. I can speak from personal experience on that. You know, I don't know if I think I've shared it with you recently, but me and the Queen earlier this year got engaged. So we're heading another step down the path to marriage. And she's divorced with 2 children. I'm divorced with 2 children. So we're really navigating the conversations right now, Laura, about how we're going to do this remarriage finances in a post-divorce world.
Yeah. How's that going?
You know... You have to tread very lightly, right? I mean, I've been divorced now. It'll be 9 years in February. So, you know, it took me quite a long time to make up what I had lost through my divorce. I'm not one of those men who just holds on to it, and you know, I've talked to guys, or I'm never going to get married because I don't want to lose my money again. I'm not that guy. I don't see it that way. However, I want to be smart about it, but I don't want to be one of those guys who allows money to dictate the relationship. And I think a lot of guys especially will allow that to happen because they've lost a lot of money through a divorce. They never want to go through it again. So they look at every relationship and every opportunity for a relationship through the lens of dollars and cents.
Right.
And I'm not that person. But I think we have to navigate it because she's got her own opinions about it and I've got them. So I think the first thing you asked, how's that going? It's really trying to understand what her expectations are and what my expectations are. And it's a lot of communication right now. I've been very transparent with my finances as well as she has. So I think that's really the starting point. That's where we've gone so far.
So you are embarking on that path towards remarriage, and Drew and I can't say marriage is not the thing for us, right? But we're committed in that same way, and we have a lot of conversations about this. He's twice divorced, and we have, you know, complete transparency, but it is how, you know, I like what you say, letting the dollars and letting the dollar signs dictate the relationship. You know, I want to take the finances out of the equation and make sure the relationship is what I want it to be and going where I want it to go, and then figure out, you know, as we begin to build a life together, how do we bring that together, but also how do we preserve it in the event of anything. You know, divorce, death, you know, anything. I want to be smart. As a woman, I feel completely, as a divorced woman, me personally, I feel relentlessly committed to remaining self-sufficient, even within my relationship.
So there's a fine line between self-sufficiency and independence. Self-sufficiency is, in my mind, a mindset. independence is likewise a mindset, but it almost approaches in what I would think, at least in a relationship standpoint, adversarial, where, independence is something to be held on to, like,
Right.
tooth and claw, and you're never going to give it up no matter what. I think there's a very fine line there between those two, especially as it relates to money. I can certainly appreciate, your position of not wanting to put yourself in a situation, God forbid, where, you're left to fend for yourself again. You don't want to be in a situation where you may have to claw your way back, as many people do, especially women. I totally understand that. With that being said, you made a statement earlier, and I want to take that a little bit further. You said, I want to be smart about it. Most of us, and I'll speak for myself, when we entered into our first marriage, one thing that we were not is intentional about anything. All right? We weren't intentional about anything. We literally were caught up in, this wave of emotion and this wave of what society thinks we should be doing, and we were just along for the ride. So, the wave crashes, we're left stranded on this island now, and if we're going to get back into the water again, we're going to be more intentional about it. We've been intentional about the person that we've chosen to be with. We've tried to make sure that they're the right person. Likewise, we have to be intentional about the number one thing that causes most relationships to fail, and at least it's noted, and that's money. To do that, I think that the very first thing that we all have to do, and we said it earlier, and I think you've also hit on it, is we really have to be transparent, and we have to share what our concerns are, what our goals are, and not try to change the other person's goals so they meet yours, but understand where those goals are, and then you have to make the decision whether or not they're compatible or whether they're not.
My road has been really difficult to get myself self-sufficient, right? To get to the place where I am taking care of myself, I am responsible financially for myself and my kids when they're with me, and I feel good, and I have a path. And I've worked very hard this year on beginning to think greater than the present today and more about, okay, I'm rapidly approaching 50, and I need to think about my future, not knowing what my future holds. So pretending that the existence of Drew and our relationship, while it's there, I'm still making decisions based around me that'll take care of me. Not because I don't want to merge and create this new life with him, but because if we both don't do that individually for ourselves and the children we have, and we each have two, how can we possibly figure out how we are going to come together and preserve what we want to preserve for our own children and set ourselves up for any eventuality that each of us would be okay?
Down to some brass tacks here. So
okay.
We'll use my situation, for example, okay? My children are younger than the Queen's, and, I will be paying child support for my two children after we get married, okay? For several years. That's something that, both of us, we just need to make sure that we have clear expectations on, right? Because I'll tell you right now, Laura, and you, I'm sure, know this, speaking with all the women that you do, a man's child support for kids that don't belong to her can, after a while, become a drain. If a guy is paying, let's say, $500 a month, right, and he's paying it to his children that don't belong to her, unless they have a clear expectation and understanding and transparency around that, that can generate some animosity on her part. That's money that should be ours. I mean, I've received emails from women before who they're actually paying the child support for their husbands because the husband's not paying it, right? That's a contentious issue that needs to be addressed early on in the relationship. So when you talk about planning accordingly, right? Yes, he needs to continue to plan for, and I'll use me, it is not the Queen's responsibility to pay my kids' child support. It should never be. All right? I'll never expect her to do that. Yes, it will be part of the collective pot, if you will, but it's not going to be a situation where I'm going to expect her to pay the bill now that we are married. I'm not sure a lot of people always think that way.
Just as each of you, I would imagine, with your respective exes and co-parents, will be planning the college funding.
Sure, absolutely.
And how does that look? And her obligation to that may be less than or more than your obligation to your, everybody's situation is different. And it's, I almost feel like all those things have to come out of the pot. What's left, what the pot becomes what's left after the obligations are accounted for.
Well, there has to be those expectations. You're absolutely right. And we'll talk about college because it's a very valid point. She's got children that'll be in college before me. She's got her plans around what she's going to be doing for those college educations. Likewise, I've got my plans as well. What we can do, all right, what we can do at some point or the other is get into some sort of fairness contest.
Right.
Let's say, for example, she's paying more for her college education for her kids than maybe I am for mine. There should be no expectation on my part that now somehow she's going to make up the difference because we're married.
Right.
That can't be the case. Now, if that's something that she wants to do voluntarily, that's her on. But it should not be an expectation. It goes back to what we talked about earlier. We have to level those expectations out so that all of us know what to expect before we get into it. We have to communicate, and that's what we've done. People ask me all the time, Laura, why have you and the Queen waited so long to get married? It's going to be at least 7 years before we actually walk down the aisle. And they're going to ask, why have you waited? Because we've taken the last 5 years to do crap like this. To talk. You can't figure these problems out in 6 months.
You know what? Guess what? A lot of the time it doesn't seem fair. Right? It doesn't seem fair. And I have such a problem with that because guess what? Life isn't fucking fair. This is the way it is. It's just the way it is. And because in divorce situations, my financial obligations, after it's all said and done, and I've got one off to college already, and I got one in a year and a half going off, I'm going to be in one situation, and Drew is in another.
That's right. And
I feel strongly, and he knows, because I've said this to him before, when we come together equally contributing as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to feel like either one or the other of us is underwriting the bill for both of us. That's not fair to me, for me. I want us to create a situation that allows for us to live whatever the lifestyle is that we're going to be able to live and also maintain a plan for our future that is smart and realistic. It's not easy to do. There's no easy answers.
Well, I don't necessarily buy into this idea of fair, all right? Because fair, first off, it's a very relative term. What you think is fair, I may think differently. I'll say this, and I'm not trying to be critical to anyone who's walking down that path, but if you're walking into a relationship where your total goal is ultimately to be fair, I'm not so sure that ends well because it'll never be fair. It's never going to be a situation where I am going to be absolutely 100% or 50% of what the Queen is. It's never going to be that way. I'm afraid in my mind, if I go down that path and I begin to think that way, the moment that I think it stops becoming fair is when we have problems.
Guess what? Now you throw all these kids into a mix, and one of them, one out of the bunch, who knows which one, requires more of a financial investment than the rest.
We could talk about that next time because me and her have had numerous conversations around, well, what happens if one of the kids needs to move back home? after college. They have to become, the boomerang kid. Thankfully, we both see eye to eye on this. We'll have to see what happens if and when that actually takes place. But that can be a real issue. I can tell you, I know a couple right now, today, where two of her, we're talking mid-20s here, Laura, are living in their basement. His kids are doing their own thing. Her kids are living in the basement. Believe me when I tell you, it's a problem. A real problem. And if it doesn't get addressed soon, that relationship is going to spiral out of control.
And it doesn't have to be just that boomerang thing. It's what happens when one needs significant therapy? What happens if one is an addict? What happens if one gets himself into trouble with the law and legal? I mean, the list goes on, and trust me, I know people dealing with all of them. And when it's not your, meaning as a couple, your child. It's one or the other of you. Very complicated. This is not easy shit. This is like complicated.
What's your final thoughts on this?
There's no substitute for time and transparency. You got to be, I think transparency is the number one thing. You've got to have every conceivable conversation as openly and honestly as humanly possible. And rushing that, not giving that the time it needs to develop so that you can come together in a way that makes sense, even though you won't be able to anticipate everything. No substitute for time and transparency. That's it. That's my final words.
As a couple who is entering into a committed relationship and they're divorced, and we'll use divorced parents because I think that is probably the apex of where the problems are. Don't underestimate or cast aside the challenges that lie ahead. All right? Just know that it is a very, very hard walk that you are going to be on, and that walk needs to be tempered with a lot of patience, ample understanding, and flexibility that you probably have never had to experience before. Knowing that for the most part, my kids, mine and McQueen's kids, if you take a look at them, in a matter of 8 years, we'll be empty nesters.
Yeah.
Right? 8 years, we'll be empty nesters. It's going to get invariably easier after that. Okay? We can't let this challenge before us throw us off course for what we have after that. So we have to be very sober about it. We have to talk about it. We've got to be very patient with each other and understanding with each other because it's not going to be easy. We understand that. That's why we've taken, like I said, it'll be 7 years almost by the time we're actually married from the time we met to try our best to figure these things out. And we'll just have to hope that all of that hard work will pay off in the end.
You prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Perfect ending. Laura, until next time, thanks so much.
Good night.